Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege. I see we've got 35 attendees. We wouldn't want to keep you waiting, the people that are most keen. So let's kick off. An absolute big, massive welcome to all of you who've attending today. This is Apollo Hyper's founder community. We have a community of founders, investors, and advisors on there. So it's great to see that a lot of you are making the most of the platform. So a big welcome. And most importantly, a massive welcome to Bartek Ogonowski, the founder of LEVRA. It's a privilege to have you here today, Bartek. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayden. Good to be here, man. How's it going?
Yeah, no, great. So from my side, Bartek, I mean, you're actually one of my personal role models, someone I look up to and aspire to. And I think just in the startup community as well, you're someone who exhibits a phenomenal set of values that I think have had a massive impact on me, and I think continue to have a massive impact on the startup community. So thank you. And yeah, I guess over to you, Bartek. What I want to know and what I think our viewers would love to hear is, I'm going to frame the question to ask: what is your origin, your vision, and your mission, whether that's personally or professionally?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you, Hayden, and that's a very kind word, and it's good to chat to a fellow South African in London. It's not like we uncommon here. I mean, a big question, and I'll maybe just touch on it briefly, otherwise I could get lost in that rabbit hole of those three big things. But maybe importantly to note is that I often think back that, the chances of being alive is 1 in 400 trillion. And that's often a fact that I think about a lot. The chances of just being alive today, 1 in 400 trillion, which means that the fact that we're on this earth, the fact that we're here, surely we should be doing something for society. Surely we should be doing something greater and good to make a difference in today's world. And that maybe sums it all up nicely. That's what really drives me. That's what keeps me going. This fact that we're here for a reason, make it count. And I think that's something that I definitely live by.
Epic. Thanks, Bartek. So jumping into your professional journey, I know that you attended Oxford and you completed your MBA there. Why did you choose to do that? And tell me more about, I guess, what the biggest outcome of that was for you and what you've seen being the biggest benefit.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I spent about 7 years in the corporate world, worked at Deloitte back in South Africa, realized that I wasn't going to be in the corporate world for forever. And I really used the MBA in general as a good way to transition from a corporate mindset into an entrepreneurial one, because I think a lot of it comes down to your mindset as opposed to anything else. And then why the University of Oxford? I mean, it's not only like the most amazing place in the world, but also it's got a big focus on Africa, business in Africa. It's got 71 nationalities in the class, so you learn from like a global, diverse mindset, and just the opportunities to get involved with a wider university, which is still the #1 university in the world, was just insane. So that's probably three of the reasons why.
Yeah. So you haven't been pulled into the corporate world. You haven't eyed out a massive paycheck at an investment bank or the like. You've opted to go into entrepreneurship. How come?
Well, I mean, as I said, 7 years in the corporate world at Deloitte, and I think I kind of just got to my point where I had such an amazing grounding, and I think it was the most amazing experience. Loved Deloitte, loved my time there, and a good base to kickstart and jump into, this world of taking all the risks. And that's quite funny because I spent 7 years in auditing, which is all about risk aversion and how to manage risks. And then I just dropped that and went into this world of taking every single risk I can. So it was a big shift, absolutely, like a huge shift to jump away from a monthly paycheck, advancing up the corporate ladder. But it's something that I did, and I'm sure we'll talk about LEVRA in a bit, and my co-founder and my journey. But it's literally something that we both did, and we gave it our all, and we stuck to it. And that's the only way we kind of got there. So gave up the big paycheck for now, at least, and hopefully it will come back in the future.
Absolutely. So did you, going through your MBA journey, did you envision that post the journey of completing the course that you wanted to start your own thing, or how did that decision-making process go about?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to do something to make a difference. And that sounds cliche on many levels, but I came from a family of medical doctors, and the whole thing about being a doctor is to make a tangible impact in someone's life. And that was always in my mindset. How can I help others? How can I help others through something that I can do to make a tangible difference? And for me, the calling that I found was through education. And I feel it's such a powerful tool to help others. So it's really something that I wanted to always do, and definitely use the MBA as a bridge to get into this entrepreneurial world. So I had the intention of moving away from corporate fully into a startup in education. And that was the kind of, day one, what I felt. And obviously, serendipitous meetings and occasions led us to LEVRA.
I see. So, I mean, South Africa has quite a large education issue, I guess, a large uneducated and unemployed population. Was that, growing up in South Africa, was that something that you'd always wanted to potentially solve? And you've now taken that mindset and applied it to, well, using LEVRA. And I would love for you to explain what LEVRA does, and how that aligned to those original thoughts of wanting to uplift people.
Yeah, well, you used South Africa, so we might as well stick to South Africa and maybe mention rugby a bit. But there's a very famous player called Makazole Mapimpi, and I often refer to his analogy because he was almost discovered in the township areas. He had no family, he almost had nothing, and he was discovered to be one of the best rugby players and best wingers of all time. And if there wasn't this sense of like helping this person and giving them opportunities, giving them something to get their confidence out, to be the best version of what they can be, in that sense for Makazole Mapimpi, it was a rugby player to be on the world stage. That same analogy applying to specifically in South Africa, young people that are talented and have so much potential, but just help them, give that opportunity to actually uplift them through human skills to thrive in the working world of today. So that's kind of the analogy and what really drove a lot of what LEVRA's vision is.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I can see the inspiration is to help people, uplift people. How have you transcended that into making it a thriving business and something that is functioning in a developed world, in a developed economy like the UK?
Yeah, so we live in the UK, South Africa, and Australia at the moment. So we're looking at different markets, but using the UK as a big basis or big base post Oxford, it made a lot of sense. How are we currently doing that? And maybe I'll take you a bit through what LEVRA does and the journey of that. But not only did we see a huge, massive problem between young, technically capable students leaving the university and starting at the working world, there's a huge skills gap. And both my co-founder, Emily, and I have seen this as a huge skills gap where people were never taught how to communicate, how to speak, how to present, how to make a good first impression, how to be a good active listener. All skills that are considered to be soft skills, but actually the most important skills in any business or any relationship. It's all about communication. It's all about human connection. And if you can get better at these skills, and if we can help people get better at these skills, then they set for success, or like some stepping stone to get there. We also realize that the world we're living in is technologically advanced and rapidly changing. Not only are the younger audience using TikTok and Snapchat as a way to communicate, but things are much faster and more, fast-paced. So gone are the days where you can do workshops for a week and think that everyone is going to absorb and digest that information. And e-learnings today are considered to be the 95% skip culture because everyone just skips to the end. And I'm sure everyone on this call can relate in some way. You'll have an e-learning, you'll kind of do it in the background, but not really do anything on it and get to the end and cool, you've ticked the box. You've done your learning. You've now a leader because you've done 15 e-learnings. That unfortunately doesn't work. It's like going to the gym and taking a selfie and acting like you worked out. But if you don't do constant practice of these human skills, you'll never get better.
So and correct me if I'm wrong, so you're using virtual reality to implement and facilitate these sorts of learning courses that have, I guess, a tangible outcome that can be measured. Is that how it would work in terms of growth of the candidates that go through these programs with you?
Yeah, so let me break it down into a few things. I mean, let's use the analogy of Navy SEALs. Navy SEALs are even using virtual reality as a way to immerse themselves into a high pressure situation and like recreate the sense of this battlefield where they can practice in a safe way before they have to go onto this, the actual battlefield. We've taken that and we've said, well, how can we apply that to soft skills or human skills? And how can we actually leverage technology? So it's not all about the virtual reality. It's one of the ways in which we do our training. But how can we leverage technology for good? Instead of it replacing humans, like many things are these days, how can we actually use it to improve humans? You put them in this virtual reality situation for a short period of time. They're fully focused. They're fully engaged. They've got to practice a high pressure, real life situation and get live feedback in a psychologically safe manner. And what that does is it not only provides the learner an ability or an opportunity to practice, but it also gives them this safety to fail. So you can actually make mistakes. So when you do go apply those in the real world, you'll feel a lot more confident and more able to practice or to actually deliver those skills in person.
That's super exciting. Something that I can potentially see myself participating in. And yeah, so I guess you're implementing this as a solution for businesses to upskill their staff. How did it start in terms of? I mean, I can see your passion and you're driven to solve that issue, be it in South Africa or in the UK. How did you go to market in terms of building? If you are using virtual reality as the device, how did you go from 0 to 1, from the idea into executing this into getting your first paying customer? If you would be able to break that down for us, that'll be insightful.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to what problem are we solving? In today's world, you've got to make sure that, or in business, in life, you've got to be delivering something that there's a real need for. So what we did during the MBA was really to research and understand from potential customers, what is the problem you're solving? Are you seeing this as a problem? What's going on with your young adults? How's your communication? How's your culture at your firm? All these like research-based questions that, so a lot of LEVRA is based on a very solid foundation of research and backed by, to 8-9 months of that MBA experience and the research there. You have to be solving a pain point. It's all good and well that you're doing VR and AI, and some people might be like, well, what are you actually trying to achieve? It's more than that. It's a foundation of we're solving a real problem that exists, that customers have told us that this is a huge problem, they need solving, and this is a relevant way to solve it. So to summarize your question, it's all about listening to what the needs of customers are and solving a real pain point.
Yes, because I mean, a lot of our founders on Apollo, they're all pre-revenue and they're at the idea stage, and we encourage them to, like you say, validate that problem. Yeah. What did you do to do that? Was it interviews? Was it surveys? How were you gaining these insights in terms of validating that this problem was real and that it was really big?
It's talking to people. It's listening. I mean, you'll be surprised how many people in your network that actually work in a professional services firm, which is our immediate target, or another firm where communication and people are important. We just started talking to people that we know and asking for introductions. And we spent a lot of time just talking to people and understanding the problem. So for the first 8-9 months, it was nothing transactional. It was nothing about, we selling you an idea, which is often what I think startups do, is you selling. But it's more about, well, what are you selling? If there's no real need for it, you first got to understand what you're going to sell. So for that, the initial phase, Hayden, was really about speaking to people that we knew, asking them for introductions to people that they knew, and really understanding what the pain points were. It's nothing sexier or like more complicated than that. It's literally just hard grind and like reaching out to people and making time to go out and speak to people.
Right. And in terms of you trying to find it may be a valid problem, in terms of trying to understand whether or not people would actually pay for it, was that a different challenge that you found? And did that also come about with conversations, or did you have to essentially finalize the product before you went to market and then assess what the price point was and what you would charge?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think often in business, and especially in like early stage startups, we're all trying to find this idea of product market fit, and that product market fit is everything. You know, you've got to not only have the right product, but you've also got to have the right market, and it's a constant battle between, okay, well, what is the market saying? Okay, let's get our product up to speed. Okay, the market needs something more, the product needs something more. So it's this constant iteration. You'll never get it perfect. Think about Uber or Airbnb or all these huge companies. They're constantly releasing updates. They're constantly listening to customer feedback. They're making new changes. So it's all about that balance. What we did though is we went to market with a low cost, low code MVP. We decided to not build for the sake of it initially, because building our own underlying tech stacks and everything from scratch was going to be millions of pounds of investment. And to be quite blunt, we didn't have the expertise at that stage to do that. And we weren't going to raise £3 million to build something that there was no customer need for it. No investor would give us money for it. So we went to market with a very smart way. In a very smart way. We amalgamated different technologies. We developed something what they call an MVP, and went to market and tested that product based on the initial customer feedback we had, and constantly using champion customers to build that.
I see. So how many iterations or changes to the product have you made since going live with your first version, and then subsequently changing it as and when you've got the feedback?
Well, today it's probably version 3 at the moment. We're now busy with a very slick and new technology roadmap, because we've now gone live to hundreds of users, and we've got good feedback, and we can actually take all that feedback and make much more of our own technology and AI integrations, which we can talk about in a bit, which will be our next big release early next year. But at the moment it's 3.
Very nice. Epic. Okay. And how did it feel to get that first paying customer, and who was it? Who was the first paying customer?
Yeah, so it's we left our MBAs in September 2022, and for the first 8-9 months it was completely bootstrapped. It was no funding yet. It was just hard grind and like a lot of very stressful nights and pushing through that time. And when you get that first customer that eventually says yes, approved. I still remember that day. It was actually Deloitte in South Africa, which was our first yes. And it was such a great, 360 moment, but also the moment you get validation that someone is they're paying for the service that you've now offered. I immediately just started crying. I mean, and that was just like this buildup of stress and like all this thing and like negative thoughts, and people are saying it's not going to happen, and people are, it's not going to work, and this, and then all of a sudden you've got Deloitte saying, yes, we'll pay for this service. And like, I called my co-founder. We both just had this moment of like, okay, yes, we've got it. We're onto something big, and just like big emotions. But like any startups, that lasts for a little bit, and then you're back to the grind, and you've got to think of the next big challenge. But it was an absolutely amazing feeling, and probably something I'll never forget.
Yeah, that's epic. What I take from that is you relied on your closest connections, knowing that you were at Deloitte prior to going to Oxford. These people, I'm assuming that they had a personal relationship with you, and they could gauge your professionalism. They knew what you were capable of, and did that to a large extent give them confidence in knowing that you'd be able to deliver on the product that you're promising.
I think absolutely. That we had like a board meeting earlier, and we're talking about like sales cycles and the question was asked about, how long are these sales cycles taking, etc. And I made a comment to be like, well, it probably took 8 years because I worked at Deloitte for 7 years, and you look at that as and we got them a year later. So absolutely, it's all about credibility. This concept of never burn bridges, always be kind, always treat people around you with respect. It's all important, because I loved my time at Deloitte. I left on good terms and then went back and started effectively selling to them. And they knew who I was, and that, I think that makes a huge difference. Absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you raised your first, well, your first check. Not sure what round that was. Probably was, if it was friends and family, but it took you 8 to 9 months. What I'd like to know is how your traction was at that point when you did raise, and what leverage did that allow you in terms of valuation and having some form of clout, so to speak. And this worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, well, we've raised one round. We've raised one pre-seed round, which is the 410K. The first bit of external investment or grant money we got was actually from our lead investor, Sterling Road, based in Silicon Valley. And how they work and how they operate is that they invest in founders, and if you make it onto their program, they give you £1,000 grant. So that £1,000 was like our first initial external money that someone put money in and said, cool, we back this idea, we like you guys. And you almost go in like an 8 to 12 week program with them, where there's a call once every 2 weeks. And if you effectively do well in those calls and you meet in the milestones, they pick you out of that pool and you almost win the first check. So that first £1,000 was the first grant, equity free. And then that gave us a bit of leverage to start raising the pre-seed. In terms of the actual pre-seed round that we did raise, the traction that we had at that stage, it wasn't revenue, because we had no revenue at that stage. But traction doesn't only have to be revenue. Traction, and I remember we built this about an eight page document of, okay, what is our traction to date? How many customers have we spoken to? What are customers saying? Who have we spoken to? What is our background? What is the founding team's experience? What is our networks, and who do we have access to? What is the current market? What is the market saying? And what is the current traction with edtech players in the market in the similar industry? So as you can see, there's a lot of different traction that you can actually put into this, as opposed to just saying revenue and money, because traction at a pre-seed stage is not going to be that. And writing up this whole, sort of thesis allowed us to actually say, okay, we acknowledge, we're not going to hide and say that we've solved all the world's problems yet. We acknowledge that we're early, but this is what we've done to date. And when you actually write down all these things and what you've achieved and how you've done it, and you build up traction, it gives you credibility, not only to investors, but to the market, that, okay, they're onto something. There's almost customers that are saying, we will buy this once you've achieved XYZ. So letters of intent, expressions of interest, that kind of traction. And to your last point of your question, how that helped us with valuation, because we raised money at a priced equity round. We almost looked at similar companies and what they raise in a pre-seed stage. We got a range, and then we agreed with our lead investor on a range based on the metrics and traction we've had, and arrived at a number, and that's the number we raised that on a valuation perspective.
I see. Okay, lots to unpack.
Lots to unpack, yeah.
We've got a question from Nabila in the chat, which we'll get to, Nabila. But my first question, what was in terms of, if you had a list from 1 to 10 in terms of validating traction, what would you say was your biggest hitter, and that would have really hit home with investors when you said we have traction? What would you have told them in priority order from 1 to 10, or give me the top one essentially?
What, at a pre-seed stage? Is that what you're asking?
Was that the letters of intent? Did you have a whole bunch? Had you done a lot of sales work and had a lot of conversations, and people had signed these LOIs, and you had them in your back pocket and you could just slap them on the table and say, we've got these, or what was the...
those are important, but at a pre-seed / family and friend stage, I think the investors are more interested in the founders. They're more interested in about who you are. Do they back you as a person? And they acknowledge if they're qualified investors or they've got some experience. They know that the market's going to change. The idea might pivot. You might go into something completely, like not completely different, but you might move away a little bit, or you might make a complete pivot actually. But they're backing you. So they were backing Emily and myself as co-founders. They knew that we had a proven track record of work experience, of corporate experience. We had both built up our corporate ladder, and we're reliable and hardworking individuals. And I think they back that. So when you look at pre-seed or early stage funding, number one is probably the team. And then I think it goes on to, the customer conversations you've had after that. And then probably the size of the market and what problem you're addressing.
Yeah. I mean, I can see completely how your background would aligns to the customer base. And I can see that you would have been perfectly suited to solve that problem. So that does make a lot of sense. So this was a VC that you reached out to in the States?
Yes. So the way that they operate, and I mean, maybe going back to the whole thing about the University of Oxford, everyone says that the MBA is all about your network and what you do with it. And you kind of don't really understand what that means until you do it. The VC that we've got as our lead investor now, the managing partner, Ash Rust, he was an ex-Oxford alumni, computer science alumni, and he's got their fund, Sterling Road, invest in Oxford founders. So they've got a specific fund that invests in Oxford founders. It's got to be 2 founders from Oxford doing something with technology and both full-time. And that's kind of like the initial mandate. So that's how we got into the program, through the Oxford Entrepreneurship Center, and use that network to get in there. And although they're based in Silicon Valley, which in the future can open us our doors to America, absolutely, but they've got a fund specifically for the Oxford founders, which is what we tapped into.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you completely built up that social proof that you were the best candidate to take this idea to market. And why not? Why shouldn't you be, given your background? So I can completely see and understand that view. So, well, firstly, well done to you, Bartek. Thank you. A question from Marcus: how did you pay the personal bills at home between kicking your idea off and actually receiving money in the business?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and probably one of the most difficult transitions, especially from a constant income to bootstrapping and understanding, okay, when are we going to get some funding? When are we going to be able to pay ourselves? What we did is almost, there's this concept of value in a company or NPV of like a business or deal, whatever. When have you actually ever done that on yourself as an individual? When have you sat down and actually looked at your finances properly and said, well, how long can I sustain myself before there's no go? And that exercise is not only very important to do, but it just gives you visibility and makes it a bit of a step process, Marcus. So looking at savings, and I'm not going to dive into all the different dynamics, but looking at like savings, what I currently had, and both my co-founder and I then basically came up with a timeline. And we knew that we had until the end of March to raise our first bit of funding or get investor interest. And if we didn't, then it would be another discussion and it would be another story. But it's almost like a strict timeline, knowing how much you have to putting yourself in a strict budget and going from there.
Right. So in the UK, there's the SIS opportunity, I would call it. Is that something that you used, or were you able to use that, given the lead investor was he living in the States, or is he a UK-based individual?
Yeah, I think that's a very important, and I can maybe just unpack that a bit. So the UK entrepreneurship ecosystem is amazing for several reasons, but one of them is this concept of SEIS or EIS, which is the Small Enterprise Investment Scheme, or just the Enterprise Investment Scheme. And basically what that means is that if your company qualifies to be a registered SEIS or EIS company, investors that invest in you that are UK based can actually get tax back. For SEIS, they get 50% of the money back in their taxable income return for that year. So some of our angel investors that invested £10,000, they immediately get £5,000 back as a tax deduction. There's also a further capital gains exemption, and any losses. So if LEVRA goes completely bust, all those losses will also be limited. What that means is that actually at a very early stage, the UK ecosystem for entrepreneurship is encouraging young, good entrepreneurs and encouraging them through angel investors actually getting money back. So we absolutely use that. It wasn't applicable for our American investor because they're based in the US, but for a lot of our angel investors that are based in the UK, they benefited from SEIS and they got their money back in the tax return.
I see. So we often encourage our founders to find the first check or get someone to write the first one, and the rest of the money will follow. Is that how you found it? I mean, this guy that your lead investor from the States, he sounds like quite a big hitter. Was it, once you got him on board as the lead investor, was it a little bit easier to get people to follow suit?
I think so. I absolutely do think so. I mean, you've got, when we go to market to investors and say, we've already got investment from a Silicon Valley VC, it absolutely adds credibility to our investment round. So yes, as an angel investor in the UK, although a lot of them, and I mean, we spoke to over 150 people initially to get investment. A lot of people were digging in and doing a lot of due diligence, absolutely, which is good. But the fact that we had that backing definitely added, a layer of credibility. So it's all about getting that first investor, and especially if it's a big ticket and a big name and a Silicon Valley based VC, that made the whole process a bit smoother. So that was our big first milestone that we got. And thank you to Ash if you are listening.
Very nice. So 150 outreaches to investors. How did you go about that? Was it a cold or warm approach?
I think it was a bit of both. I think you don't know what you don't know, and when you start it, you get an advice from so many different people, and then you start doing cold outreach, and then you're downloading lists from the internet that have 10,000 angel investors, and you start emailing them, and you almost get lost in this conundrum. Looking back, what worked well, being strict with it, fundraising, especially at the early stages or any stages, it's like a full-time job. And eventually we had to split responsibilities, and that's the beauty of having a co-founder, because one person can then lead the fundraising round and one person can carry on with more customer outreach and business operations. And initially what we were trying to both do both, and eventually you get stuck and you won't get anywhere. You've got to have a set target of like how many people you want to outreach and how many calls you want to have a week or a month, and be very diligent with it. If I look now at the cap table we've got, a lot of the people that are on our cap table as investors are more warmer networks or warmer leads, if that makes sense. So either people that we had met through the Oxford network, we had a lot of our MBA friends that put in angel tickets. We also had some family and friends on board that obviously backed us and what we were doing. And then also people that we had met in the London network or through some events in the last couple of years that were big hitters at banks, medical doctors, people that we had known and we had a personal connection with. And we've got such a nice variety on the cap table of investors that all offer a very cool, different way of looking at the company.
How did you get all of these individuals to agree on a valuation? It sounds like there was, quite a number of them.
Yeah, so maybe going back to that whole sort of report or thesis that we had written up, that was an absolute really good way to start the process of valuation. And we did have some resistance. There were some investors that were like, well, how can you put a valuation on it if you don't have any revenue? And I guess to be fair, it's a valid question, but you also look at the market and understand that you're buying into me now, you're buying into LEVRA at this price. The journey is we're going to get to this price. We're going to get 40 or 50x or whatever, and we don't have to go into all those multiples just now, but we're offering you a really good price to get into. If you believe in us, if you believe in the vision, if you believe in the market, if you believe in the opportunity, this is where we're going to get you. So the valuation at this stage, although it's important, we didn't try and make it the crux and the be all end all, because we know that it's a journey and it's a trade-off, because one, you can't have the valuation too low, because then you're going to dilute all your equity and then it's not an attractive investment. And secondly, if you make it too high, it actually puts pressure on us as founders and the LEVRA team, because the next valuation round, you've got to show some level of improvement of valuation. So if you make it too high to not dilute equity, you're putting pressure on yourself. So we found that happy medium between, also looking at how much is usually sold and from an equity perspective at a pre-seed round. And that answers between 10 to 15% of equity that you should usually sell at that round. So it's almost like reverse engineering and saying, okay, how much money do we need? And a very meticulous auditing background financial analysis of like, how much money do we need for the next 18 months? And then working backwards to say, cool, if that is 15% of like what the company's valuation is, then we get to this number. And we looked at a few different approaches to eventually arrive at the valuation. And ultimately, the people that invest in the network were clearly happy with the valuation because they see the longer term valuation potential.
Thanks, Bartek. Yeah, that's some very extremely insightful advice. Coming back to the cap table,
yeah,
it sounds like you were a hot commodity. It sounds like were you potentially oversubscribed? Were there a whole bunch of people wanting to get their piece?
I wouldn't say that just yet, Hayden. Maybe the next round will be a really hot commodity. It was a grind. It was very difficult. It wasn't easy. I mean, I wouldn't say oversubscribed at all, and I do think it was a big challenge, especially because we were still new and didn't have revenue and traction. But good interest and people that eventually backed us. We reached the target we wanted to reach, and within a good time frame. So I think we showed good potential. Maybe next round will be hot commodity and oversubscribed.
Did you have to be quite selective of who you let become part owners of your business, and did you have a strategy in terms of and an approach in terms of who you prioritized from 1 to 10 in terms of who you wanted as lead investors to non-lead investors?
Yeah, absolutely. I think initially we didn't. Initially, it was just like cold outreach and reaching out to people cold on LinkedIn and almost like trying to sell yourself to these investors that you have no idea who they were. Eventually, we flipped the mindset and we said, you know what? We want people, and you correctly said now, owners of the business. The people that are buying the equity stake in your company are owners of the business. They are the ones that are going to help you along the journey. They are the ones that are going to be bought into the idea and potentially be of amazing value in the future, whether it's at a later stage of selling or if it's more like advice along the way. So then we started flipping the paradigm shift and saying, okay, we're actually looking for investors that are bought into the idea of upskilling humans, that will be able to offer advice in these certain areas. And we had a whole sort of list of what we were looking for. So it was almost a bit of a qualification of investors before we just did this mad outreach. So that's why the conversations were very, they were warm investor leads.
I see, absolutely. And you leveraged, you've leveraged your network since the day you got to the UK. So it's spoken a lot because it's spoken about raising investment, but then also who your first customers were going to be. It was all close contacts, close leads, and I think that's probably something we could all take away from it is to rely on the relationships that you've already built up.
Absolutely. I mean, probably worthwhile noting, Hayden, that our relationships go way back too. Maybe you want to tell the story, or should I?
You can have a crack.
Well, I mean, not to harp on it, but it just shows you the power of human connection. That Hayden and I got connected through our uncles that were friends from Krugersdorp 50 years ago. So it just shows you the power of how people get back together. And we didn't know each other until 6 months ago. So always be a good person, always be kind. You never know when the full circle moment's going to happen.
Absolutely, Bartek. Thank you. I mean, I would never have asked, I would never have asked you to come on Apollo if we didn't get along, or if you were a bit of a dick, so to say. So you're an exceptional lad, and it's exactly. It's been great to build a relationship, and you never know what's going to come further down the line as well. So we've got another question here from Jandara. If there was one networking group or one platform, one event or place that a new starter must be a part of, I guess it's someone who doesn't have a network, someone who likely didn't go to Oxford, because I think, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, the acceptance rate there is below 2%, if not 1%. So what would be your biggest advice in terms of making the business a success and yourself personally a success today? What would you say has been your biggest strength in turning the outcome that you have today, regardless of the social proof and that sort of that pedigree that you got from Oxford? What would you advise someone like Jandara who's starting out to build their network? What would you say?
So I always use this analogy of your comfort zone. And I think it's so important that you've got to be pushed out your comfort zone in order to meet new people, make new connections. Similar to how I moved to the UK a few years ago, and being pushed out this comfort zone of South Africa to expand my growth and my network. You're not going to meet people and you're not going to expand your horizon and networks if you aren't pushing that comfort zone at all times and stepping out the ordinary. So if you start looking for events, I mean, if I look at the London or Oxford events, you kind of, there's so many available. And that's what I love about London. 2-3 times a week, I'm often at an event where it's startup founders pitching, or there's some JP Morgan drinks where we've met one of our advisors, or there's just like so many different events. And the moment you get tapped into one network, you'll get newsletters from them. There'll be another event. There'll be other newsletters. There'll be other events. There'll be other newsletters. Communities like Apollo, as an example, which Hayden, you can chat about too. There's just so many good networks and communities. And of course, you're going to get some that aren't good and you're not going to find value from them. And that's okay. But it's also like it's about going to a lot of these different events, speaking to a lot of people, and that's what worked for us. Eventually finding the ones that are good and valuable and meeting people there. And if I look at like the LEVRA team as a holistic, from suppliers and networks and investors and advisory boards, a lot of these people are people that we've met through different networking events and different communities. And that's how you grow. That's how you grow as a business.
So from what I'd say from that, Bartek, as well, is that you've had to build authentic and genuine relationships, and your network has come down to the strength of those relationships. And from what I know of you is you always propositioned it as to how I can help you, as opposed to I'm looking at investment, please can you help me? It's when I messaged you were so willing to come on and share your knowledge. And again, thank you for that. But I think that's probably something that we can all take away from this, is to say, how can I help first and foremost, and put that as at front of mind, as opposed to how you can help me. Is that something you would agree with? I do think that is your philosophy, so you probably would most definitely agree with it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, well, thank you, Hayden. But absolutely, this concept of paying it forward, and I do think one of the coolest things about the startup or entrepreneurship world is that you often find people that are very willing to have a call or a coffee with you or a conversation or to talk about their journey or to give you some advice. And it's all about this concept of paying it forward without receiving something back as a transaction. Where, as in the corporate world, it was probably slightly different, where everyone's kind of like out to be the top of the food chain. The entrepreneurship world, everyone knows it's very hard. It's a very difficult road. Starting a business is not easy. Secondly, the people that you're speaking to are completely in their own zone. There's no competition. It's not like if someone else is doing a business, even if it's in education, they're on a completely different path. They got their own customers, they got their own values, they got their own philosophy. So everyone's willing to pay it forward, knowing that that advice or that help will come back to you. I guess you could call it karma, but I like calling it paying it forward. We've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of people over these last few years. Everyone we're speaking to is willing to offer advice or gain some insights. And we're almost like sponges. Like, we have to learn from so many people. You start a business and it's like, where do you start and what do you do? If we didn't have all these amazing mentors and advisors and calls and coffees and discussions and events, we wouldn't be where we are. So absolutely, this concept of paying it forward and helping one another, because it will come back to you.
Thanks, Bartek. Well, thanks very much for paying it forward today.
Of course.
Before we close off, I've got a few quick fire questions for you, just to end on a nice, light and hearted and fun spot. So, first question: who is your entrepreneurial idol and why?
Not because he's South African, but Elon Musk is my idol from a business perspective as a whole. And
Great. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you want a reason, but yeah, Elon Musk just pushing the boundaries.
If you have a reason, that'll be great. Why not?
You know what? He's just pushing the boundaries of normality, and he's just taking risks, and that's like, I love that. And he actually makes a lot of sense if you listen to him. Absolutely.
Perfect. Alrighty. If you could recommend one book for founders to read, be it fiction, autobiography, business leadership book, what would it be?
I read a book recently, and it's top of mind, called The Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett. And although some people might not like him, he breaks it down into 33 very good principles of life that you've got to listen to. And I would recommend that book. It's one that I've just finished reading. So absolutely, if you're in the startup game, read that book and listen to his podcasts. Hopefully we'll get him on our podcast. We've also got a LEVRA podcast. Hopefully we'll have him in the next few years. That's one of our little goals that we've got in mind.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bartek. Everyone on the channel, please do follow Bartek, follow his journey, follow him on LinkedIn as well. I hope I hope you achieve as much as Elon Musk, if not more. And my final question for the day: if you could exhibit only one type of leadership characteristic 100% of the time, if this is the only leadership characteristic you could exhibit, which one would it be?
Sure, it's a tough question, Hayden. I would say kindness. I think it's often underrated as to, the ability to listen to people, to understand one another, to respect their point of view, and just being kind in that is absolutely fundamental, because at the end of the day, it comes down to human connection, working together with one another, and just really respecting each other's views.
Thanks, Bartek. You've exhibited some kindness today by coming on the show, so really appreciate having you on Apollo today. And we from Hyper, we just want to wish you all the best as well on your journey as an entrepreneur, and shoot for the stars. So thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us at Apollo today, and we wish you all the best. If you have any questions, please do reach out. If you have any questions for Bartek, please do reach out as well. As you would have seen, he would love to exhibit kindness, and that's his value and philosophy. So he would most definitely help you with any questions you have. But much love from the Hyper team, and Bartek, thank you very much. We'll be in touch, and have a lovely.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Hayden, and just a big thank you from me to Team Hyper, to Apollo, to yourself, to Tom West, another true example of paying it forward and the advice that he gave me and got me into this network too. So thank you very much, and love what you guys are doing, and looking forward to just growing our friendship.
Thanks, Bartek. Have a cracker. See you soon.